Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dave Chen's YouTube channel. I am David Chen here today with a special guest. He is a film reporter over at TheWrap.com. Scott Mendelson, thanks for chatting today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I know the fans demanded this.
For a long time, Scott Mendelson and I did a weekly Twitter space on Sunday mornings where we would count down the top five movies of the box office. We're no longer doing those Twitter spaces anymore for a variety of reasons, but we wanted to do a special presentation on YouTube, and I'll probably release this as a podcast on my Patreon because a momentous event has occurred this week, Scott, which is the release of Avatar: The Way of Water. It is on track to be one of the biggest films of 2022. And Scott Mendelson just can't tear himself away from talking about box office for major events such as this one. So it's like, hey, let's get the gang back together and dive into the box office for Avatar: The Way of Water. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Avatar. We'll spend most of our time talking about that, and then we're going to talk about the other movies in the top five at the box office. So, Avatar: The Way of Water. The high level headline for Avatar: The Way of Water is that this movie opened this past Thursday, Friday, and it has made an estimated $435 million worldwide as of this recording, which is we're recording this on Sunday morning. The numbers might change slightly, but that's pretty close to what they'll be. That is $134 million domestic and $301 million international. Let's start with that domestic number, Scott. Some people might view this as a disappointment because tracking had this to be landing somewhere between 150 and 170 million dollars domestic. The actual number is closer to 134. However, we probably shouldn't read too much into this movie coming below tracking, right? What are your thoughts on the opening domestic number?
Well, it's a good news, bad news situation. Obviously, studios tend to like it when their movies open in line with tracking, or if not above tracking. And, they certainly would have preferred a sexier 150 domestic, 450 worldwide debut. That being said, the reason I'm somewhat optimistic, behind the obvious Christmas legs factor, we'll get into that in a second, is that the film had a 2.5 multiplier, which is pretty decent for a would-be tentpole these days. And I'm going off memory because if I click around, you'll hear it, and David will be sad at me. But it made $53 million on Friday. That includes $17 million in Thursday previews. So what's 53 minus 17? 36. It
Mm-hmm.
made about 43 million on Saturday, and it made about 37 million on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is that it made more money on Saturday and Sunday than it did in the raw Friday. Which means is that yes, there were people that were interested in the picture, but waited until it was convenient on Saturday or Sunday to perhaps take their family to this 3-hour adventure film.
Yeah, and
Um,
that is typically a healthy sign
yes,
because what you want for a movie such as this one is what people in the industry call legs. That means you want the movie to continue making money day after day. You don't want like everyone to go on Friday and then no one's going on Saturday or Sunday. That would indicate in that situation that most of the demand is up front, and that next weekend there's probably going to be a huge drop. But we are not seeing those
not
signs,
yet.
correct?
And yes, and the film earned an A from CinemaScore. It earned, I think, like a 4.5 or 4.45 from Run Track or whatever. Those, I generally put more stock in CinemaScore because that's especially more so than like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb because those are opt-in. And while Rotten Tomatoes has done a very good job over the last couple of years of trying to get verified polling for people that they know actually bought a ticket and watched the movie, CinemaScore, you walk out of the theater and, hey, I want to talk to you. So there's no opt-in nature to it. But anyway, I'm digressing. Um, the big caveat, of course, is that this is Christmas weekend. Prior to the Star Wars films, the notion of opening a big film in December was that you would trade a massive opening weekend for ridiculously long legs. If you recall, Titanic opened in 1997 with $28 million. It barely opened above Tomorrow Never Dies, which was the second Pierce Brosnan James Bond picture. Now, Tomorrow Never Dies actually legged out to five times its opening weekend for $125 million total. That was more domestically than GoldenEye at that point. As for Titanic, I think pretty much everyone listening to this, remembers what happened with that. That one went on and on and on and on, to quote Celine Dion. Um, it legged out to $600 million domestic. It was the number one movie at the weekend box office for the first 15 weekends in a row. That is still a record. Um, it basically steamrolled everything in its path from January, February, and March before finally falling to number two against the unbeatable might of David. Do you remember? Trivia question?
Avatar 1?
No, 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 no. Titanic.
Yeah, I see. So it would have been that year. What year did Titanic come out?
1997. So this would have been April
Okay,
of
so
1998.
April of 1998. Oh, no, man, I got nothing.
Sorry, I'm just being
No, it's
annoying.
okay.
Lost in Space, which was a big budget, hard sci-fi action remake of the 60, I want to say 60s television show. I apologize if
Incredible.
I'm wrong on
That
that.
was a William Hurt and Matt LeBlanc. Am I remember that correctly?
Yes,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Gary Oldman.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, During his run of, not only was he always playing villains, but even when he wasn't playing villains, Gary Oldman was the Sean Bean of his day, and that he always died on screen, no matter how
Hmm.
illogical no matter the role, no matter the movie.
Wow. Spoilers for Lost in Space. But anyway, let's get back to Avatar 2. So,
Yes. So
but
Avatar opened
yeah,
in 2009 with $77 million.
yes,
This despite massive snowstorms nationwide. That was the biggest December opening of all time. And it was and still is the biggest opening ever for a live action original picture.
right.
It legged out to almost 10 times its opening weekend for a $749 million domestic total, which was the record up until Star Wars The Force Awakens. It became the biggest grossing movie of all time worldwide, made over 2 billion overseas for a over under 2 point around $2.7 million total, which again was the biggest movie of all time until Avengers Endgame opened in 2019, and it made 859 domestic, I think, and it made 2.75 worldwide. The This is where irony comes in. The reason it was able to top Avatar worldwide is because it made 620 in China. Not only was that a record for a Hollywood film in China, that was a 71% jump from Avengers Infinity War.
Hmm.
While Endgame jumped more or less 26% from Infinity War worldwide, which is fantastic, it skyrocketed in China. But in early 2021, Avatar was re-released in China as sort of a, help keep the theaters alive in between tentpoles kind of thing, and it made $57 million in China, which was more than enough to put it back on the top of the biggest grossing movies of all time list.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing right is that Avatar 1 didn't have that impressive of an opening. It was like very good at the time, but really was only around 77 million, as you said, and then had massive legs, went 10x its opening weekend. Right?
Yes. And
Um,
I remember that Wednesday running the numbers, looking at the Monday and Tuesday grosses, and realizing that they were basically the second or third, or maybe fourth, if I'm wrong, biggest Monday or Tuesday grosses ever, behind The Dark Knight and Pirates of the Caribbean 2, despite making half of that in its respective opening weekend.
mm, mm,
And so by Wednesday, I was like, "Oh, this is happening again, isn't it?
hmm.
You fucking pulled this off twice."
So we will
Uh,
see. We will see whether or not Avatar 2 has amazing legs as well, along with Avatar 1. We don't know yet. We'll see.
no, we
Probably we'll know a
don't.
lot more next week,
It
right?
also opened with almost double the,
Yeah,
inflation notwithstanding,
yeah,
almost double the predecessor's opening weekend. I mean,
yeah.
by any rational standard, this would be a breakout sequel.
Right.
Generally speaking, when a movie that opened with $77 million and was leggy and popular and well liked and profitable and years of post theatrical self discovery on DVD, VOD, streaming, whatever, and then the sequel comes out and makes almost double that, that's John Wick. That's Pitch Perfect. That's Austin Powers 2 or Dark Knight or Pirates of
Yeah,
the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest. There's no, under normal circumstances, this would be a gigantic affirmation of the Avatar brand.
yeah.
And that it's a little bit more complicated is because of expectations.
Right, right.
Some of that Cameron brings on himself, which good for him. I mean, I don't know if the film really needs to top $2 billion to break even. I think that was a little hyperbolic, but He's the one that put that out there. So
Yeah, he has said in interviews that this needs to be one of the top 5 grossing movies of all time in order to break even, basically.
here's
Um,
the thing about that, whether that's true or not, and I don't know. The most important thing that Avatar: The Way of Water needs to do is not become the biggest grossing film of all time or whatever. It needs to be well liked, well received, and buzzy enough among general audiences that while making a solid chunk of money, it makes people think, yes, I would like to go back to Pandora or whatever they call Waterworld. I apologize. Um, in Avatar 3 in 2 years.
mhm.
Because this is the first of 4 planned sequels. Um, and the comparison is just, but this isn't. We're not in Fantastic Beast territory yet. That was one that was announced as a 5-part series. The first film did very well. The second
Yeah,
one dropped. Nobody liked it. So as expected, the third one crashed and burned. And to be fair, Warner Brothers knew what was coming, and they made the third film into a soft finale.
yeah.
And Cameron has even said, if Avatar 2 bombs, I'm going to wrap this up in 3. I'm not an idiot.
Right, but
That's
at
true.
at this
He may be an maniacal maniac, but he's not a moron.
at this point, it doesn't look like it's bombing
No.
necessarily, but we don't know if it will be only an okay performance versus a great performance. It's still just too early to tell. Now, that
Yes, it
said,
is.
there are a couple of questions or a couple of follow ups regarding the $134 million number. One of them is that apparently a lot of ticket sales are from premium format
Hmm.
situations. So IMAX and also separately 3D have accounted for a significant percentage of sales. And some people speculate that maybe this is because people are waiting
Hmm.
to like the fairly low opening weekend gross is because people are waiting so they can see it in an IMAX or a 3D format, which might have like been sold out this past weekend. So maybe like they'll be like, hey, I'll see it next weekend in 3D or IMAX like it's meant to be seen. This
Yeah,
matches anecdotal information I have from my friends who are like, hey, I'm gonna wait to see it next week because I want to see it in the way it's supposed to be seen.
that
Right?
makes 104% sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I took my children, who liked it for the record, in regular 3D yesterday because I couldn't find a decent IMAX or Dolby 3D screening that were 3 of us and I had a family friend and his son. 5 seats in a comfortable showing for a 3-hour movie. So I went with a theater that was just a normal 3D showing. It looked fine, but honestly, having seen it in Dolby 3D high frame rate, I almost felt like I was cheating them because there was a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to diss the theater. It's a lovely multiplex. I visit. I go there all the time.
Yeah.
But there was a part of me thinking, maybe I should have waited till Monday or Tuesday, and I could have more easily gotten a Dolby or an IMAX.
Yeah. Uh,
So if people are, if you're, if you're thinking, let me see if I can make this work. If you're thinking of seeing Avatar in 3D and IMAX, and you're in line for IMAX or 3D tickets, stay in
Stay in line.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
According to Deadline, IMAX and PLF tickets accounted for
43.
30. Oh, it says 32% here for Friday and Thursday, basically.
31% traditional IMAX, or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, traditional 3D, 12% IMAX 3D,
Mm,
12% PLF, which means everything else like Dolby, AMC Prime, or
yeah.
whatever, 2% motion 3D, and then 1% Screen X 2D. Screen X is interesting.
Yeah.
That's one where did you actually get a chance to see three
No, never
Top
saw it in
Gun in
3D,
there?
but
Okay.
that's the one where there's 3 screens. But yeah.
Yes,
But
yes.
let's not get sidetracked. I want to ask you about the China numbers because China was a huge part of Avatar One's success, and according to our conversation before this broadcast today, it seemed like the China numbers were coming in below expectations, Scott, for Avatar: The Way of
Yes.
Water, right?
Um, Avatar made $200 million in 2009/2010 in about 7% of the theaters that are currently available. COVID restrictions notwithstanding, I'll get to that in a second. Um, and there was every presumption to think that audiences loved Avatar in China, and they showed up for the re-release in pretty decent numbers, and that the hope was that the film would perform so well in China that it would mitigate some of the downturn in other marketplaces. Um, Now, the caveat to that is for the last 2 years, specifically 2001, 2000, 2021, 2022, there have been far fewer Hollywood movies being allowed to play in China than in pre-COVID times. And those films have earned a lot less than what would have been expected by pre-COVID standards. For example, Minions: The Rise of Gru made 36, 37 million in China. That's great. The film still did, I think, 935 worldwide. But Despicable Me 3 made 153 in 2017. Aquaman made 298 in China in 2018, 2019. The Batman made 20 million. Jurassic World Dominion, which is the biggest Hollywood movie in China this year, made $161 million, which is very good. The film still got above $1 billion, but it's well below the 262 for Fallen Kingdom and the 227 for Jurassic World back in 2015. So Avatar 2 underperforming what I would say even realistic expectations so far is absolutely in line with what we've seen the last 2, 3 years. So it's not an Avatar problem so much as a, and I
Hmm.
say this isn't good and evil. I don't want to get into a cultural, whatever. It's a China problem.
Hmm.
And China's had its own tentpoles at least since 2015 that have been kicking ass and taking names just in China. Some of them are very good. I've tried to see them just so I'm more aware. The Battle of Lake Ching Part One earned like $910 million just in China in late 2021.
Yeah.
That's the second biggest single territory gross ever behind The Force Awakens in North America. Films like Wolf Warrior 2, which is a slam bang action, it's basically Rambo but in China. If they ever get an American remake, Antoine Fuqua will absolutely direct the remake. It's that over the top and
Hmm.
ridiculously violent, and I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
and
so Avatar: The Way of Water in China, like what? How did it do this weekend? At the
oh,
end of the day, like
minor detail.
it's not
Uh, it
doing.
o-
Yeah. Go ahead.
it's not doing great. It only
Yeah.
did about 24 million on its first day,
Yeah.
which is about on par with Aquaman,
Yep.
which eventually legged out to almost $300 million. It did 57 million for the weekend, compared to Aquaman's $94 million opening weekend. So even if I was being a schmuck on Friday saying, "Oh, it only opened as well as Aquaman," boo, hoo, now you're seeing a severe downturn.
Yeah.
Legs and circumstance, and maybe Chinese audiences waiting for premium formats too. I think we may be looking at a total a hell of a lot closer to 150 to 200 million than anything approaching 300, 400, 500, 600.
Yeah.
Just for the record, Avengers Endgame made 629 in 2019. That was the biggest Hollywood grosser in China. The last two Fast and Furious films, The Fate of the Furious and Furious 7, both made around 380, 390,
Hmm.
and then F9 did 215. Which, to
So,
be fair, they didn't like F9 for many of the same reasons that they didn't like after Massive Opening Weekend, Detective Chinatown 3. I keep bringing that up because conventional wisdom says that F9 dropped like a rock after John Cena said something positive about Taiwan. It wasn't that. The movie was already in the
mhm.
decline.
So at the end of the day, it is currently on track to come in well under
Yes.
movies like Fate of the Furious, Aquaman, World, etc. in
Yes.
China, unless it has like staying power, which it very possibly might, but like at this point, it's not looking like it's tracking that way, right?
No, because the opening weekend wasn't leggy. Because
Yeah,
the reason I'm a
yeah,
little more optimistic today in North America than I was yesterday is because of the strong legs
yeah,
of the opening weekend.
yeah.
Also, China's New Year starts in about a month, and they're going to have the Wandering Earth 2 opening. That is a sequel to a blockbuster sci-fi disaster. I think
Yep.
it's on Netflix. It's a lot of fun if you want
Yeah.
to check it out.
And
That's actually
that's gonna take the wind out of Avatar's sails as well.
it's
Yeah,
yes, very much so.
yeah.
And again, if Avatar does well everywhere else, then China will be gravy, which
Hmm.
is how it should have been looked at in the first place. Even Avatar making, oh no, oh wow, it did 200 million in China. Yeah, that's less than 10% of its total gross. Without getting into without getting into an epic poem about China, most of the movies that broke out in China over the last 10 years are the same ones that broke out everywhere else. They were films that would have been huge smashes without a penny from China. All China did, and this isn't nothing, especially in a macro sense, is they somewhat artificially inflated the global grosses of already successful pictures. And in many cases, for a situation where studios would only get back 25% of the gross from China versus over under 50% everywhere
Yeah.
else. So I think kowtowing, patronizing, and pandering to China, again, this is not a good and evil conversation. That was always a mistake because they weren't getting nearly as much out of it as it looked on paper.
Yeah, you're just saying from a business perspective.
Yes. Again, I've
Okay.
seen a lot of Chinese blockbusters. A lot of them are really good.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I know some, yes, some of them are propaganda or nationalistic, but whatever. I didn't come out of
Arguably,
the Battle of Lang Ching wanting to take up arms against America and win the Korean War.
yeah. Okay, before we move on, Scott, we are broadcasting live on YouTube, and Avi in the chat is saying India and Korea are positives.
Yes.
So let's just talk briefly about that before we move on. But yeah, anything else about Avatar: The Way of Water, and specifically India and Korea's performance?
Yes. Korea, it did $25 million. I don't have the numbers in front of me in terms of, is that a record? Is that not a record? But if you give me a minute, I can see. Because usually when I do these with David, I've already done a whole post and I've already done all the
Yeah,
research.
no
Okay.
worries, no worries. But like, you don't need
It's
to.
the
Yeah.
second highest non-local opening weekend of the quote-unquote pandemic era in Korea. It's the third biggest opening weekend of the pandemic era in Taiwan. It's the second biggest opening weekend for a Hollywood film ever in India behind Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, that's a big
That's
deal.
interesting to
That's a
me.
big deal. Yeah.
And again, oh wow, it did 18 million in India. That's awesome. Oh no, it only did 57 in China. That's terrible. This is obviously, relatively speaking, if Hollywood comes to the conclusion, and I think they've already have to a certain extent, that China is no longer worth the trouble of bad press and the challenges of dealing in that marketplace. And again, this is strictly business. I'm not, it is almost conventional wisdom that they might try to target India next
Mm-hmm.
as the put too many eggs into one market kind of over prioritization basket.
Yeah.
So the fact that this film did very well in India while being seen as a relative disappointment so far in China, I think that continues that narrative.
All right, last question, Scott, before we move on from Avatar: The Way of Water. Again, and I just want to reiterate, this is a movie that has made over $435 million worldwide, 134 domestic, 301 international, and is number one at the box office this weekend, obviously. Top Gun Maverick, when it opened this year, one of the biggest success stories of the year, it earned, I think, 124 in its opening weekend, and then went on to make 6 times that amount for a domestic box office total of 718. That is a massive hold from week to week. It dropped very little from week to week to make 718 domestic. We have already discussed how Avatar 1 opened with around 77 and then went on to make 10 times that amount by its final take. If you had to guess, Scott Mendelson, Avatar: The Way of Water has opened with 134 domestic. Where do you think this movie's going to end up domestically?
I'm going to do a quick best case scenario math.
Especially when it compares, like a best case scenario would be it has the same
I
legs
mean,
as Avatar 1 and ends up making, what,
yeah,
$1
like $1
billion
billion.
in the
Yeah.
US? That's not possible, though, basically.
I mean, it's possible because the movie still delivers on a nuts and meat and potatoes, what audio visual sense, and there's not a lot coming out in early 2023. And yeah, Megan could break out, ha ha ha. But I mean, if Avatar 1 can handle Dear John and the Book of Eli both doing very well, and The Force Awakens can handle
Yeah.
The Revenant kicking ass, and hell, Rogue One dealt with both Hidden Figures and La La Land, passing 150 domestic respectively. I think even a ridiculous even a ridiculous performance for Megan on par with Split, if Avatar is still well liked and popular and all that jazz, it will still be fine.
Well, okay. So just to be clear, the top grossing domestic movie of all time at this point is Star Wars: The Force Awakens, which is $936 million.
Yes.
So when
It's
I was
not
saying,
touching that.
When I was saying, that's what I was saying. Is like to get 10x 134 would mean like it would make $1.1 billion. No movie has ever done that. Now maybe it will because James Cameron has proven us wrong many times, but It would be
My
shocking.
feeling,
It would be shocking if it made
and
that much, right?
my
I,
feeling is that the realistic, optimistic best scenario
yeah.
is that it has the same legs as Aquaman, which made
Mm-hmm.
4.65, a $72 million domestic debut in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
and earned 335 million domestic. If Avatar 2 ends up with 134 for the weekend, and again, the estimate could go up. I'm inclined to think it will. Disney does that sometimes when, if they know they can get, every studio does this. If they know they can get good press on Sunday for slightly underestimating the weekend, and
Yeah.
then they can get more good press on Monday for saying, "Hey, we did better." Ha ha ha. Then, there's no reason not to do that. But anyway,
Yeah.
134 times 4.65 is about $623 million. Inflation notwithstanding, that's on par with The Last Jedi. That's on par with The Avengers. That would be great. That would be a reasonable, realistic downturn from Avatar 1.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that it only has the legs of The Force Awakens, which was incredibly leggy for $100 million opener, by the way? No, 248. That did 3.78 times its $248 million opening weekend, which would be a mere sad, pathetic $506 million.
Okay. So you're saying probably it ends up between 500 to around $650 million,
That
which
feels reasonable.
which would put it under Top Gun Maverick, which would
Hmm.
put it, I think, also under Wakanda Forever. No, not would
No,
not put it under Wakanda Forever, but it would it would put it. Let's see, would it that put it in the top 10 of all time domestically?
I don't think so. Not
Um,
506.
yeah, not 506. The number 10 right now is Avengers, the number one Joss Whedon one with 623 domestic. So it has a chance of being pretty great, and we'll see.
And
Certainly, it's
again,
not.
I could be wrong. It could quadruple its multiplier, and
Yeah,
we end up, it's again, we'll know in a few. Believe it or I would argue we'll know in a few days.
yeah. I will also
Because if it's
say,
pulling Force Awakens level Monday, Tuesday grosses, or hell, even
yeah,
Rogue One level Monday, Tuesday, despite a lower opening weekend, again, that shows that people wanted to see it, but they didn't need to rush out and see it because they wanted to wait for a premium format, or they wanted to wait till it was more convenient. Because yes, I guess there are twists and turns and surprises in this film, but there's no gotta rush out and see it now before Twitter spoils that kind of situation.
yeah. At the end of the day, though, I think the movie is a hit, right? It might not
Yes.
be the number one grossing movie of all time. Like maybe it will be, but at this point, it doesn't seem like it's tracking that way. We'll see very soon. But it is a hit, and James Cameron has shown that people are still interested in this world, and that is an achievement. That is something that perhaps not everyone believed that he could do, or that people were still interested. But he showed that people want to return to Pandora, and maybe they're willing to go a third, fourth, and fifth time. So
Yes.
that is kind of the headline story at the end of the day,
I
and
mean,
we'll know a lot more in a week or so.
and I have to remind myself of this too, but again, in any other circumstance, even 10, 13 years later, a movie that opens to 77 million and then 13 years later the sequel opens to 134, that's a breakout sequel.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, a
Um,
lot has changed since then. Namely, this
it's
is one of
harder.
yeah, it's harder, but also um, as you said, there's less competition. Today,
Yeah,
movie studios released so few movies in 2022. It's staggering,
and
and so
that's
yeah,
without taking anything away from Top Gun because that movie obviously played very, very well and a lot
yeah,
of people loved it. That was one reason why Top Gun was as leggy as it was because there really wasn't that much between periodic tentpoles the entire summer.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, it's a different industry, but whatever the case, um, James Cameron has proved his critics wrong again, and we will see how far Avatar 2 or Avatar: The Way of Water can go. All right, Scott, let's take a few minutes to quickly talk about some of the other movies in the top five. Now, again, worthy to point out that the number one movie at the box office this weekend made $134 million, and the number two movie at the box office made five. That is a massive, massive gulf,
Yes.
and shows just how unhealthy the box office is. Not to say anything about the number two movie, which again, people love and is what is beloved and so on. But I'm just saying, it used to be, Scott, when you started in this industry, the number one movie might make $130 million, and then the number two movie would be like $100 million or $98 million or whatever, right? Now
Um,
there's a massive gulf
and even if
between.
there was a gulf between, say, I number one movie makes 134, and then the next ones make 50, but there'd
Yeah,
be like
50.
half a dozen movies making between 20 and $50 million.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Now you can't. Now number two, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever can't even crack $10 million. That being said, it is in week six of
yes,
its release. But I'm just saying, I'm not saying it again. Nothing bad about Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I'm commenting more about like how sad the state of the U.S. box office is right now. Because Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, by all metrics, is also a hit. It
yes.
is. It has
The
made four.
issue isn't that Black Panther: Wakanda Forever is only making $5.4 million in its sixth weekend. The issue is that that is the number two movie because there's so little out.
Right. There should be like other
It should
movies
be in like
coming
seventh
out,
place.
that are also like that are also kind of like making a lot more money. Again, that's not what's happening in the box office right now,
Um,
unfortunately. That
as
said,
for Wakanda
yeah.
specifically, it's made
Yeah.
787 million worldwide, 419 domestic. I think the most negative thing you can say about the picture is that it's only performing about as well as what we all expected Black Panther to do 4.5 years ago,
Hmm.
and that's not exactly a criticism.
Well, Black Panther, I think what you're also indicating is that Black Panther, which came out in 2018, dramatically overperformed
Yes. I
expectations.
mean, I think we were all expecting Spider-Man No Way Home, or excuse me, Spider-Man Homecoming numbers, which was around 335 domestic, 881 worldwide, which was seen as a giant hit, by the way. Um, and that, and you take out China and Russia from Wakanda Forever, and that's basically where it's going to end up.
Yeah. So Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, massive success, huge hit. However, it is a significant come down from Black Panther One, which I think uh, everyone, including myself, viewed as a phenomenon, and I think it will stay that way. Like, it's not. It was not a repeatable event. It now
Yeah,
seems right.
and
Black Panther One in 2018 made $700 million domestic, 680 international for a total take of 1.38.
eh,
This one probably Black Panther: Wakanda Forever probably not likely to crack $1 billion at this point, right?
no,
Yeah,
it'll crawl past 800 million,
yeah.
which
So
is, I'll be honest, it's a little disappointing. Does that
well,
mean anyone gets sent to the gulag? No, of course not. But, it's unprecedented circumstances in terms of,
unprecedented. The fact that they were able to make a movie at all
yes.
is so
Uh,
impressive to me,
and
and
think
yeah, and the fact
I
that it's a huge hit is also
I think
another
there's a
success.
slight
So
downturn, and very slight, in terms of general audiences that will show up to any Marvel movie just because it's a Marvel movie, and a slight downturn in terms of people who otherwise might not care about Marvel but do care about Black Panther, and maybe they were in it for T'Challa slash Chadwick Boseman. Fine, whatever. Um, if we end up with a situation where there's a ceiling for regular Marvel movies that's only 410 million in domestic and only 800 million worldwide, darn,
yeah,
that's fine.
what Scott is responding to, I think, is that there's a lot of press these days about people experiencing Marvel fatigue. And Scott Mendelson's opinion is there is extremely little evidence of Marvel fatigue. These movies are still making, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars domestics, six, seven, eight
Yes.
hundred million dollars worldwide. That's still very, very healthy for Marvel films.
Here's a
So
stat worth throwing out. Once Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and this is not accounting for inflation, once Black Panther Wakanda Forever crosses about $426 million, it will have passed the domestic gross of Captain Marvel. At which point it will be the second biggest no Spider-Man, no Iron Man MCU movie in North America behind Black Panther.
so yeah, it's still again, it's still a
Your
huge
move,
hit, and
Guardians 3,
yeah, it's still a huge hit, and nothing is meant to
whose
kind of take away
trailer
from it.
looks spectacular in 3D, by the way.
All right, real quick, number three at the box office this weekend, Violent Night, $5 million for a domestic total of 53 million. I'm sorry, $35 million.
Yes.
Pretty solid, feels like to me.
If you let me click, I'll check
Fun,
on the
fun,
overseas numbers.
fun little action movie.
Yeah, it was a $20 million picture. It's at 55 worldwide already.
Yeah.
This is, I don't know if the world needs another Santa Claus Goes John McClane movie as a franchise, but if they want to make a sequel, I wouldn't blame them. because it's doing very well theatrically, especially for a Christmas movie released in December.
Hmm.
Because weird trivia, most of the Christmas movies you know and love were released in November.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And this will do very well on PVOD because it's such a casual, well, I want to see it in theaters, but I didn't get around to it.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
it's already
mean,
on PVOD.
I cannot wait for it to be on PVOD. I'm gonna pay $20 whenever it comes out
Yeah.
on PVOD. So
My son wanted to see it, but I wanted to do a date night with my wife, so I left him home like a hero. But I promised him when it comes out on VOD, we will
yeah,
watch it as a family.
yeah. Number four at the box office this weekend, Strange World, which made $2 million for a domestic total of $33.8 million. This is basically a calamitous box office performance overall, but I'm impressed to still see it in the top five. Scott,
Well, I think it's what we discussed a minute ago. The fact that it's in the top five says more about the marketplace than the movie. I mean, it's making
Strange World. We
$2.2
should point
million
out, yeah,
in
Strange
its
World
fourth weekend.
cost $180 million.
Yeah, and it's going to do. Let me hold on a second. I apologize. 50. God, it's 56 worldwide. Violent Night's going to beat it.
Yeah,
It's
that's
going to be
pretty.
beaten by an R-rated Santa Claus movie.
That costs a
It
quarter as
cost
much
$20
money to
million.
make.
The menu's
Yeah,
going to outgross it domestically. That's a $30 million R-rated, eat the rich, metaphorically speaking, horror film / drama.
yeah,
And this goes, I wrote about this after the fact, but Universal is kicking Disney's ass when it comes to theatrical animation.
yeah.
And most of that, I would argue, is self-inflicted because of the choices that Bob Chapek made in terms of what to send to Disney Plus and what to put in theaters, and in treating the films that were in theaters as glorified pit stops on the Disney Plus marketing campaign. And if that's me being a dick, Disney can take it. And frankly, I think real damage has been done.
All right. And the last movie in the top five is The Menu.
Yes,
Um,
which is a solid little programmer.
right, $1.64 million for a domestic total of $32 million.
I mean, it was a
Yeah.
little more expensive. I mean, again, I don't want to begrudge. It's made 60 million worldwide, so it's doubled its budget. It will be a solid hit. Which again, with the exception of Avatar and a couple other flukes like Free Guy, and this goes back to 2019 before COVID, obviously. Most of the Fox / Searchlight successes through Disney have been these kind of horror movies like Barbarian and Ready or Not.
Hmm. Well, I think that's the end of our top five. Now, there's a couple things coming out next week, and before we get to that, Scott, where can people find more of your work on the internet? Because it's a different place these days, right?
I'm at the Wrap. I'm putting out, some straight news. I'm putting out some overseas box office where it's not stepping on Jeremy Foster's toes. He's doing a hell of a job, and I have nothing negative to say about the work he's been doing. I mean, he's been there for years, so it's not
Hmm.
like But I'm hoping in the new year to start prioritizing Chinese and Indian box office, which is why I'm happy to see that there was actually news on both fronts this weekend. Um,
I do think a few people have asked, like, are we going to be continuing these spaces or these broadcasts? And at this point, it does not seem like that is part of the path forward, which is unfortunate. Very sad. But I have a feeling we haven't heard the last of Scott Mendelson's box office analyses. But yeah, I think people have been asking, like, are you going to keep doing the spaces with Scott? I would love to find a way to do it. I don't think it's going to happen just because of logistics and other things like that. But it has been an absolute pleasure doing these with you over the course of the last year and a half, Scott. And I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot from
so have
Scott
I.
Mendelson. And
And look, I'm throwing
yeah,
this out there. If you ever want me to guest on one of your other podcasts talking about one TV show or another, even if I'm not watching the show, I'll watch that episode.
oh, that's very nice. I appreciate that, Scott. So check out Scott Mendelson at the Wrap, and of course, if you're watching this, you know where to find me. I'm David Chen. Like, subscribe, follow, ding that bell icon on YouTube, and check out my podcasts like Decoding TV and the Filmcast. All right, next week, Scott,
Puss in Boots.
Babylon. Babylon is the big
Oh, right.
thing coming out, right?
Yes. Well, no, Puss in Boots
And
is probably going to be the big.
Puss in Boots coming
Puss in
out as
Boots
well.
did The Last Witch, which got a last minute release in China. And of all the studios of the last 3 years, Universal has been the one almost by default that's been having relative moderate success in China. So
So
we'll see.
call it, Scott. How much is Puss in
No,
Boots going to make?
absolutely not.
All right.
I'll be optimistic and say, is it opening on Wednesday or is it opening
Yeah,
on a
it's a Wednesday.
Friday?
It's a Wednesday.
Okay, I'll be optimistic and say 25 million over the 5 days, but it legs out like a motherfucker
All
because
right.
it's awesome. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
No, I haven't.
I really liked the first Puss in Boots 11 years ago, and I was looking forward to a sequel just because why not? But it's been 11 years. It's terrific. It's basically Logan slash Pain and Glory, but for kids.
Wow. Pain and Glory?
Yeah, I'm going to mispronounce this Almodovar Boulevard picture with Antonio Banderas and Penelope
Oh,
Cruz that
wow.
came out a couple years ago.
Wow, nice. Okay. Well, that is going to bring us to the end of this broadcast. Scott, it's been a blast. Thank you so much. And
Oh, you haven't seen the last of me, David Chen.
indeed,
You
we'll see
have
you.
me. You haven't seen the last of me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.